achieved legendary status amongst conmen by pulling off some of the most unbelievable deceits in the history. Frank was sentenced to 12 months imprisonment in France, which, after being reduced to 6 months, was served at Perpignan prison. He was then extradited to Sweden, where he served another 6 months. After a third trial, he was convicted to 12 years imprisonment for multiple cases of fraud. During his time in US custody, he escaped twice, but was recaptured on both occasions.
He made it seem as though he never really hurt anyone. He just defrauded big companies.
Early life. The fascinating life of Frank William Abagnale Jr. Now, you might have heard of him from the blockbuster hit movie Catch Me If You Can, but did you know that the film deviated slightly from the real story of Frank's life? Frank was born on April 27, 1948 in New Rochelle, New York, just a hop, skip, and a jump away from the Big Apple. Growing up in a suburban community, Frank's life took a dramatic turn when his parents divorced when he was only 14. Now, this is where the movie gets off track. In the film, Frank's father pines for his mother and hopes for a reconciliation until his death. However, in real life, Frank chose to live with his father after the divorce, and it was during this time he began to develop the skills and knowledge that would later make him an unstoppable white-collar criminal. By age 15, Frank was already 6 feet tall and 170 pounds, making many people assume he was an adult. His father took him to some of New York's finest saloons, where Frank began to observe the habits of powerful business people and politicians, and the importance of charm and style. Within 6 months of living with his father, Frank declared himself streetwise and began small cons, womanizing, and thievery, some of which got him caught. However, his record was expunged from these minor incidents. Around this time, Frank's father also suffered a financial loss that forced him to become a low-paid postal worker. This was a fall from power that Frank decided would never happen to him, and he began to scheme even more elaborate cons. Things came to a head when, at 16 years old, Frank was living in a contentious dual home arrangement that was making him depressed. In June of 1964, he dropped out of high school and left home without saying goodbye or leaving a note, armed with only $200 to his name. He caught a train to New York City and never spoke to his mother or father again, and that's just the beginning of Frank's incredible story. Airline pilot and other jobs. Have you ever found yourself struggling to make ends meet? That's exactly how Frank felt when he realized he couldn't afford to live in the city. So, he came up with a crazy idea to make some extra cash. He started cashing fraudulent checks in small amounts. But it didn't stop there. Frank went on to pose as an airline pilot, doctor, sociology professor, and even a lawyer, cashing about $2.5 million in fraudulent checks across the US and 26 different countries. Can you imagine what he could have done with today's technology? He could have made between 20 to 50 million through identity theft. One of Frank's most infamous scams was when he posed as a Pan Am pilot to score free flights. He even learned about the industry from Pan Am executives by pretending to be a student writer. And with a little creativity, he managed to get his hands on an authentic uniform and created his ID badge. By 19, he had flown to 26 countries and traveled around the earth about 40 times, all for free. But Frank's criminal activities eventually caught up to him. Officers apprehended him in Miami for questioning about his identity. Luckily, Frank managed to talk his way out of trouble by providing identification and references from airline personnel he had befriended. But he knew he needed to lay low, so he moved to a residential country in Atlanta, Georgia. There, he convinced hospital staff that he was a burned-out pediatrician and landed a temporary position supervising medical interns. However, Frank realized his lack of knowledge could endanger lives when a child with a broken leg was brought in. So, he decided to leave his criminal past behind and start a new chapter in his life. Brenda. Did you know that Brenda Strong, played by the talented Amy Adams, wasn't real? That's right. Brenda amalgamated several of Frank Abagnale's girlfriends from his criminal days. The filmmakers based Brenda on an Eastern Airlines flight attendant that Frank dated while living in Louisiana, but they made a few tweaks to fit the movie's story. In real life, Frank's relationships with these women were not as dramatic as portrayed in the film. Nonetheless, the character of Brenda added to the movie's charm and complexity. Interestingly, Frank and Brenda were never engaged in real life. Frank was too young then, and his relationships with these women were fleeting. Later, Frank moved to California and fell in love with another woman, but things didn't go quite as planned. When he finally came clean about his past, she ended up ratting him out to the FBI. Louisiana relocation. Frank had a life full of crazy escapades, but eventually, he decided to settle down in Louisiana. You might think Frank would want a simple life, but nope, he had other plans. Frank dusted off his old playbook and pretended to have a Harvard law degree to get a legal job. And guess what? He succeeded. With the help of a stewardess from his Pan Am days, Frank convinced the lawyer in the state district's attorney's office to hire him as a legal assistant. He even managed to pass the Louisiana bar exam after only studying for 2 weeks. Talk about talent! But things started to unravel when an actual Harvard law graduate on staff got suspicious. Frank knew he couldn't keep the charade forever. So, he dipped out and headed to Utah. And what did he do there? Well, he decided to become a professor of sociology at Brigham Young University, once again, using forged credentials. But Frank's luck couldn't last forever. He was wanted on 4 continents and was encountering too many close calls with authorities. Did that stop him? Nope. Frank decided to pull off one last con by recruiting new flight attendants for Pan Am. And to make matters worse, he even took his beautiful crew on a promotional tour around Europe, all on Pan Am's dime. In the end, Frank pocketed a cool $300,000 of Pan Am's money on top of his fraudulent expense checks. Can you believe it? Frank truly was a master con artist. Getting settled in France. At just 16, Frank Abagnale Jr. started forging checks and impersonating different people, including an airline pilot, a doctor, and a lawyer. He went on a crime spree across the United States, cashing fraudulent checks worth millions of dollars. Eventually, Frank decided to retire at 20 and start a normal life. He changed his name to Barry Allen and moved to Montpellier, France, near where his mother was born. There, he pretended to be a successful screenwriter and continued his life of deception. However, things didn't stay normal for long. The FBI was hot on his trail, with Tom Hanks playing the role of Carl Hanratty, an FBI agent based on Special Agent Joseph Shea. The movie Catch Me If You Can is based on Frank's life and portrays his cat-and-mouse game with the FBI. After years of running, Frank was finally caught in France and served 6 months in prison. Interestingly, the FBI and the agent in the movie had nothing to do with catching Frank. Instead, he was reported to the French police by an ex-girlfriend. Runaway. Frank Abagnale's life of crime started when he was just a teenager. He started by forging checks and then moved on to more elaborate scams, such as impersonating pilots and doctors. He managed to trick people with his smooth talking and charm, even fooling the FBI. But eventually, Frank's luck ran out. He was caught and deported back to the US. However, that didn't stop him from pulling off one last escape. In the movie, he jumps out of a plane and runs to his mother's house. But in real life, he manages to evade capture for weeks before getting caught in Montreal. But that's not even the craziest part of his story. While he was in prison, he convinced everyone that he was a prison inspector just by using 2 business cards. And with the help of his girlfriend, he orchestrated a hilarious escape plan that involved fake FBI cards and payphones in a mall. It's honestly too wild to believe, but it all happened. And Frank managed to escape again, this time on a Greyhound bus. He was on the run for a month before getting caught outside the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in New York. Arrested. Frank and Special Agent Hanratty arrive in New York from Europe, but Frank manages to pull off an incredible escape through the plane door. For real. It's not just a Hollywood dramatization. Abagnale did escape the plane on the runway through the kitchen galley. It's an incredible feat of daring and quick thinking that leaves you on the edge of your seat. After his escape, Frank runs to his mother's house and sees her happy life with her new family. In the movie, he gets sent to jail to serve his sentence. Still, he manages to evade capture for several weeks before finally being apprehended at the Montreal airport. Frank was sentenced to a federal detention center in Atlanta to await trial. This is where he attempted one of the most hilarious escapes in the history of prisons. He took advantage of the misperception that he was a prison inspector and enlisted his still loyal girlfriend, Jean Sebring, to help carry out his plans. It's a testament to his incredible charm and resourcefulness that he could pull off such a daring escape. But eventually, Frank was caught by two plainclothes detectives eating hot dogs on the street, and he was arrested and put into FBI custody the next day. Abagnale pleaded guilty to all known and unknown crimes he committed, and he was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison in 1971. Fast forward 5 years into his sentence, and Abagnale was released under the condition that he assist with FBI cases and teach agents his unique skills. He went on to establish a secure document consulting company, Abagnale and Associates, and continues to use his expertise in preventing fraud. It's incredible to think that someone who was once such a prolific criminal is now actively helping to prevent fraud and crime. Despite the over-dramatization and exaggeration in the movie and the book Frank published, we know that he was one of the greatest known criminal minds ever. But what's even more impressive is that his oldest son became an FBI agent, which Frank considers his proudest moment.